Leading up to its release, it was almost like you couldn't go a single day without hearing some new reason on why Pokémon Sword and Shield were going to be disappointing. The initial backlash it received after it was revealed that there would be no national dex grew like a wildfire. I hadn't really been into the series for the last several years. I didn't even finish Sun and Moon, but the controversy surrounding the next entry made me morbidly curious in a weird way. So when it was released, I bought the game to see if it was going to be as bad as people thought. However, as I played it, out of all the shortcomings the game had, the one that oddly stood out to me the most was its story. It's odd because I never really cared about the narrative in any Pokemon game, even the ones that people put in high regards like Black and White. But with Sword and Shield, I couldn't help but be interested in the ideas and concepts presented in the game, and how baffling it was to see them handled so poorly. I feel like it could have been one of the best stories Pokemon ever told. Unfortunately, it ended up becoming one of the most poorly written in the series. As I completed Sword and Shield, I couldn't help but think of the wasted potential the story had, and as I did, I began to think of ways that it should have been done instead. So, yeah, that's why I'm here. I feel that with just enough tweaking and working with what the game already has, we can make it into something that could have been great. I don't claim to be a great storyteller myself, and I've certainly never published anything, but I at least know what I like in a good story. I know what kind of things get me invested and make me care about a fictional world. The idea here is not to try and change things drastically, but to improve on the ideas and concepts that are already present in the game. We'll build upon and change them slightly to improve the general writing, but the plot will still be the same and hit the same beats. Perhaps you felt that some of the ideas presented in the games were silly, but I believe you can make any idea into a good story. Before we can go about what we can do to improve it though, we have to go through it and know what it did well and what it didn't do so well. Its strengths and weaknesses. If you feel like you already have a good idea on what that is, then skip to this part of the video, but I encourage you to watch the whole thing. The majority of the story is crammed into the ending of the game and is incredibly convoluted and confusing to the point where you might not remember important details. There are essentially two plot lines in the game. The first one is the usual Pokemon storyline you're used to at this point. You, the player, set off on a journey to become the best trainer in the region. Your rival and also best friend this time around is named Hop, and he has the same goal as you. The champion of the region is Hop's brother Leon, who's introduced very early in the game. He endorses the player and Hop to take part of the gym challenge. Yeah, we've been through this multiple times before. We don't need to go over it in detail. It's done well in this entry in the series and is generally effective for a video game to motivate the player to play the game, at least in the beginning. There are important characters you meet during the gym challenge that are worth discussing, but we'll get to them when they actually show up in the game. No, the plotline that this video will mainly focus on is the B plot, which is about the history of Galar and an event called the Darkest Day. The reason I'll be going into this storyline more thoroughly is because while the A plot is decent, the storyline about the Darkest Day is, well, trash. The concepts I mentioned at the beginning of the video come primarily from this plotline, but we'll still be discussing the A-plot when it's important, or to move along to the next point. There are a few things to know about the Darkest Day before we get started. There's a phenomenon known as Dynamaxing that makes Pokemon grow to gigantic sizes. This is possible thanks to the energy that emits from items called wishing stars. Magnolia, the professor of the region, sends her granddaughter Sonia off to find out more about Dynamaxing and the Darkest Day. The last important thing to note is that the player and Hop briefly encounter one of the legendary Pokemon at the beginning of the game. After getting your endorsement from Leon, you travel to Motostoke to register for the gym challenge and then check into a hotel to prepare for the opening ceremony the next day. At the hotel, you see Sonia and get your first taste of the history of Galar, which was mentioned before as one of the main storylines in the game. This is the first time you hear about the Darkest Day, which is an event in Galar's history about a black storm that covered the sky a long time ago and how the region was assaulted by gigantic Pokemon. She also mentions the hero of Galar who stopped it, which is represented by the statue at the hotel. We are also introduced to Team Yell and then Marnie at the hotel. Marnie is another one of the gym challengers wanting to become the champion, and Team Yell is basically her rabid fanbase. And while Team Yell is honestly just filler to extend the game's length, Marnie is a cute and endearing character that most people end up having an attachment to. Something you'll come to find out about Marnie throughout the game is that she isn't a particularly deep character. Now, before going any further with that, let me just say that I don't think that having a character who's just cute and endearing is a bad thing. Not every single character needs to be super deep or have a ton of backstory, and with how popular Marnie is, it seems like she fits her role just fine. Having a personality can be good enough as it is. With that said though, besides being an obstacle to the main character, she doesn't really serve a purpose to the story. Like, at all. When it comes to stuff like the Darkest Day, the legendary hero, or the history of Galar in general, she is not involved in any way. She is either not in these scenes at all or is unimportant while in them, which is a shame because I'd love to see her reaction to some of the things that happen during the course of the game, but we don't get any of that. She's like Hop, she wants to become the champion, but that's pretty much it. She's popular because she's a lovable character with positive traits, but she never really goes through anything. She doesn't grow or learn during the course of the game. She's kind of just there to battle you and give you another rival to fight during the game. Her only real purpose story-wise is to highlight how cool her brother Piers is, showing how caring he is of Marnie by forming Team Yell himself to cheer her on during the gym challenge. I don't want to get too ahead of myself though. But at the end of the game, when you finally defeat Marnie at the Champion Cup, she doesn't really give you a reaction besides her usual animation when losing a regular battle throughout the game. She never really shows any passion for wanting to become the champion, and it shows when she finally loses. Okay, so I lost, but I got to see a lot of good points about you and your Pokemon. Compare that to Hop's losing animation in the semifinals. He's devastated. Also, I might be jumping around the game a little bit. Just a heads up. After staying at the hotel, everyone goes to the opening ceremony where Chairman Rose, who all we know at this point is just a public figure and has a design that screams, "I'm the main villain of the game," introduces the gym leaders and the challengers, and that's it. After the ceremony, the player character is introduced to Rose and has some interaction with him. Unfortunately, the interaction isn't very meaningful as we don't learn anything about Rose and he doesn't say anything that we don't already know or of substance. He mentions Dynamaxing and how the gym challenge will be a blast before leaving for important business. But don't worry, I'm sure we'll get a lot more opportunities to see him and the build-up he has for being the main antagonist.
I am so excited. I bet he has a great arc.
As you make your way to Turffield to fight the first gym leader, you meet up with Sonia in Route 3, who tells you how Rose is responsible for Galar's energy supply, which is really important for how short and unimportant this scene feels. And then you go through Galar Mines. Near the end of the mines, you meet the last of the main rival characters, Bede. He has a cocky and confident personality and thinks he's better than the rest of the gym challengers because he was chosen by Chairman Rose himself, who Bede says is more important than the champion. The chairman also told Bede to look for wishing stars to give to him, and Bede takes this responsibility very seriously. He's a self-important jerk and a great rival character. The reason why people still remember Blue from Red, Blue, and Yellow so fondly, besides nostalgia, is because he was one of the main driving forces to push the player along and give them motivation to keep playing. We don't like him and want to beat him to the ground. One of the so-called characters you love to hate. Silver did this as well, but to a lesser extent, as he was just kind of there to be mean and showed up every once in a while, not really competing against the player. In fact, the series hasn't really seen a rival character that fulfills the role quite like Blue did since the first generation. Until Bede, that is. I guess you could make that argument for Gladion from Sun and Moon, but he seemed more of an entitled brat to me. But again, I didn't finish Sun and Moon, so I can't really speak for him. Maybe he becomes a great rival later on. Bede actually goes through development in this game. He starts off as an arrogant jerk and then throughout the course of the game shows hints of becoming more humble, or mellows out as his league card puts it, especially after Rose disqualifies him from the gym challenge and is later taken in by Opal. They also don't just outright cut out his personality either. He still has a ways to go by the end of the game, but he goes from conceited to someone who has an air of confidence, like the other gym leaders. Speaking of which, his scene with Opal is also great. The way she decides to choose him to replace her for being the fairy gym leader is humorous. He has a simple arc, but it works. Unfortunately, Bede isn't without his own problems. Just like with Marnie, he isn't involved at all in the Darkest Day plot, which is a lot more odd for Bede considering his relationship with the chairman. I never really got the vibe that Rose was like an adoptive father to Bede like some people suggest, but the fact that he's gathering wishing stars for Rose, which is an important plot point later on, and yet has no role at all in the B plot seems out of place. It also kinda sucks that after the Opal scene, he doesn't really have much to do with the story anymore, as he kind of just disappears until the end of the game. It would have been great if we saw more of him during the game before the moment with Opal happens. I do think his character arc is effective, but it would have been better if we saw more of this change with our own eyes instead of seeing the result of it at the end of the game. Despite these things, when it comes to the Gym Challenger storyline, Bede is a great addition. He isn't the deepest character Pokemon has had, but he fulfills his role much better than Hop or Marnie does. He's definitely a highlight of the game. After you fight and defeat Bede in battle, you arrive at Turffield and meet up with Sonia so you can talk about the lore. A long time ago, a great black storm covered the Galar region. Giant Pokemon ran rampant. But what was that black storm they called the Darkest Day? Didn't we go over this exact thing back at the hotel? She's definitely already said this. This time, it specifically emphasizes Dynamaxing and connects that with what she said about gigantic Pokemon back at the hotel, but that's all the new information we get. Maybe it's because I played the game twice, but I kinda figured that we already made that connection. After you talk with Sonia, you fight Milo and get the grass badge and head to Hulberry, where you fight Nessa. There's a short cutscene here with Rose and his secretary Olina, and here you'll start to notice a pattern with the cutscenes. After fighting Nessa, Rose wants to talk to you in the cafe, but just like the previous scene with Sonia, you realize that you already know all the information that's presented in this scene. Wishing stars, Dynamaxing, we've heard all this before, and this isn't the only scene that does this. A lot of the cutscenes about the Darkest Day usually covers like 60 to 80% of things you already know, and then gives you a tidbit or two of new information before you're back on your adventure, making the cutscenes feel mostly useless and padded. The information itself isn't expanded upon, it's usually just a sentence or two. A lot of these scenes don't further anything else either, so you eventually have to ask yourself, what do these scenes with the chairman or Sonia do for their character or the Darkest Day storyline? I can't think of a reason for this particular scene at all. You could argue that it's more of an introduction to Rose, but this scene lasts for maybe a minute. The conversation doesn't really do much of anything except for telling Sonia about how to find out more about the history of Galar. When a cutscene is happening, you expect something important to happen, right? Especially when the game stops you over and over again in succession. But a lot of these scenes just amount to nothing. This isn't exclusive to the Darkest Day storyline either. The scenes that revolve around the gym challenge also don't amount to much. So many of these cutscenes amount to just having some chit chat with a certain character, them asking for a battle, and then after the battle, something along the lines of "I'll improve and beat you next time" is said. There are exceptions to this, of course. The majority of Bede scenes are great, and Hop shows a lot of potential with his character in some of his scenes, like when he loses to Bede, but most of the cutscenes honestly feel like a waste of time. Because of this, I will only be covering the new information we learn so I don't repeat myself. But guess what? Because I won't be repeating myself, I'm basically going to skip to the end of the game. We've already talked about the important scenes with Marnie and Bede, and we'll get to Hop, but the game's story is structured in such a way that it honestly feels like nothing is happening. During the scenes from Hammerlock, Stownside, and Sir Chester, over the course of 4.5 hours, Sonia theorizes that the legendary hero is actually 2 Pokemon instead of human, and that's pretty much it. Keep in mind that in my playthrough of the game for this video, I avoided catching any Pokemon and didn't fight any trainers when I could. So for anyone playing the game for the first time, it could easily be double that length depending on how many Pokemon they want to catch and battle with the trainers you fight along the way. The game starts feeling like you're just going from town to town and getting gym badges, with the actual story of the game being very lightly sprinkled throughout. We have routes and other similar places in between the story, but they mostly serve as just catching and battling Pokemon, which is fine. It's giving us time to play the actual game, but we need some kind of motivation to keep going. I mean, granted, most Pokemon games have been this way in the past, but that doesn't make it okay. And even if you do compare it to previous games, it seems like there's a lot less going on in this game anyway. Pokemon is also 25 years old and has done good stories before. We have an entire B-plot to work with. Let's use it. But hey, maybe I'm missing something. So let me look up a summary of the game real quick. Professor Magnolia's granddaughter and assistant Sonia tells them about Galar's history and a mysterious event known as the Darkest Day. The player ends up uncovering pieces of the Darkest Day during their journey, much to Sonia's pleasure. Eventually, the player manages to successfully collect the 8 gym badges and travels to Winden, where the Champion Cup is held? What? I'm freaking serious. The story has such little significance during the course of the game that Bulbapedia summarizes 15 to 20 hours into one sentence. This entire summary does not mention Bede, Marnie, Piers, none of that. The story is so unimportant during the majority of the game that it doesn't need to be summarized at all. But then after this point, when the game only has a few hours left, suddenly it deserves 2 paragraphs. I wasn't missing anything at all. It's just that nothing happens. You really do just go from town to town and collect gym badges with very little important scenes happening to build up the story. Well, okay. Not nothing happens. There are a few things to go over. Sure, the Darkest Day storyline barely progresses, but there are a few important things that happen with the characters. Even though the cutscenes are very sporadic, Hop shows up an annoying amount of times to battle you, giving him more screen time than any of the other characters. The only reason I haven't talked about him in detail yet is because he's arguably the most important rival you have in the game. So let's talk about him now. Okay. Unpopular opinion time. Hop is a decent character. He's just not presented very well and often comes off as annoying because of how often he halts the progression of the game. But I don't think that makes him a bad character. In fact, he probably goes through more growth and has more depth than Bede does. I like the arc he goes through, or at least the idea of it, trying his hardest to become the champion and never being able to achieve it despite the hard work he puts into it. If anything, he's more like us than our insert character over here. We played the actual game and it was a cakewalk. From what we see of Hop, it looks like he goes through a lot more hardship and puts a lot more effort than we do. It's depressing to think about, actually. How many of us are going to get our way throughout life? Will we be able to get the careers we want? Will we ever be the best at anything? Are we even good at the things we do? Honestly, even with how annoying he can be, he's a more relatable character than anyone else in the game. Throughout the game, you can see him switching out Pokemon and trying out different strategies when you're battling him. It would have been better if he were more subtle about it, since he does outright say this in the game, but it's a nice touch. He really looks up to his brother and wants to be just like him, which isn't that uncommon for a 10-year-old. These characters are 10, right? He even goes through a bit of a depressive episode when he loses his battle with Bede and is told by him that he's dragging his brother's name down. This is cool. Even if it would have been cooler if he didn't get over it so quickly. He goes through a lot in order to become the champion, only to realize in the postgame that he likes helping Pokemon. Which unfortunately comes out of nowhere. These things are present with Hop's character, but it isn't presented or conveyed very well and can often be overshadowed by how annoying it can be at times. He has potential to be a great character, and we can easily work with what the game gives us when it comes time to talk about what we can do to improve his character. Alright, with Hop out of the way, let's go over a few other important things that happen during the game. The scenes we've talked about with Bede happen, where he's disqualified and then later taken in by Opal to fill in her role as the fairy gym leader. We meet Marnie's older brother Piers, who's also a gym leader. We learn that he set up Team Yell to cheer Marnie on in the gym challenge, and he's actually pretty cool. Charmin Rose also has some build-up for being the villain, but it's mentioned in like 1 or 2 lines before being easily forgotten about instead of basing a whole scene off of it so it stays in the player's mind. There are a few scenes that almost hint that they're supposed to have greater significance, but then just tells the player to keep going with the gym challenge. Like the scene where there's a large explosion at Hammerlock. Instead of having the player investigate it, Leon says that he'll handle it and that you shouldn't worry about it. It would have been great to investigate this ourselves, especially since after this scene is just the next gym leader, literally 10 minutes after fighting Piers. Alright, that's basically everything. Now, you might be thinking, since we're practically at the end of the game, we don't have a lot more to go over, right? Not quite. Game Freak, for some strange reason, sprinkled the Darkest Day storyline very lightly throughout the game, and then just crammed every single idea they had at the very end. Even with not much happening during the course of the game, the last hour has so many concepts that summarizing it is surprisingly difficult. So, since we've already mentioned all the important parts of the Gym Challenger storyline, let's just skip all the way to the Champion Cup. After defeating Marnie and Hop, the first section of the Champion Cup is done, and Leon invites you to dinner. They wait a few hours and Leon is still nowhere to be found, which, I'd like to mention, is very in character for him. The running joke for Leon is that he's terrible with directions and always gets lost. But anyway, Piers shows up and tells us that he's at Rose Tower and that he'll be late. They sense that something is amiss and decide that it's a good idea to go to Rose Tower to get Leon. Piers suggests that he brings Team Yell along to have some fun. Almost like they're going off to some grand battle. The characters are treating this situation almost like Leon was kidnapped or something. They're really overreacting right now. Let's go make a ruckus. Like, why though? What suddenly made this a situation where you need to go to Rose Tower yourselves to get Leon? And just for dinner too? Is there any indication that Leon being late for dinner will make it so that the finals will be delayed? As they head out the restaurant, Olina stops the cast almost as if she's suddenly a grand villain stopping the heroes in their tracks to save Leon. But like, she's being completely reasonable here. He's in an important meeting that I can't let you interfere with. In this situation, I feel like an important meeting with the chairman of all people would justify him being late for dinner. Or, if their fears are really to be taken seriously, delaying the finals if needed. There also has been no indication at all throughout the game that Rose is some kind of antagonist with an evil plan. Certainly not to the characters, at least. Olina even says that only authorized personnel are allowed in Rose Tower. They're literally going to break the law so they can have dinner and or not delay the tournament. Like, oh, really now? An important meeting? I see. If it's so important, I suppose we'll have to wait. This would be the appropriate response to this situation. But then, Alina just gives them a reason to go anyway. Don't come and disturb Rose. But also, see if you can get this key to Rose Tower from this guy so you can go anyway. Long story short, you corner the guy, he mixes himself up with the other guards because their models are all the same, and Piers does a live concert to have fans stampede over the guards to where he's at, which gives them the chance to bypass them to Rose Tower. He's got the champion holed up in there. I wonder what he's plotting. I'd like to remind you that there have been no signs whatsoever that Rose has any inclination of doing anything bad at this point. You then reach the top of Rose Tower and fight Alina, saying that she won't allow you to disturb Rose. She suddenly goes insane and says she's going to defeat you so Leon has no one to battle and thus will have no other choice but to help Rose, as if they couldn't just go to the Pokemon Center right afterwards. And then, after the battle, Alina says that all the wishing stars have been collected so it doesn't matter if we interrupt Rose's discussion with Leon. Why did we fight you then? Why did you get in our way in the first place? You've literally been saying for the past 15 minutes that you won't let anyone disturb Rose. Just kidding, we have all the wishing stars anyway. You guys should have seen the look on your faces. We then see the infamous scene with Rose and Leon. Rose saying that they need to act now to avoid an energy crisis in 1,000 years, and Leon being surprisingly logical about the situation and saying that they have plenty of time to avert it since it's in 1,000 years. With what little we've seen of Rose up until this point, it feels very out of character for him to act this way. The first few times we meet him outside of the opening cutscene, he looks and acts like some conceited famous person. The scenes that come after don't really give off that vibe at all, instead being level-headed like with the scene with Bede at the Ancient Wall. We had a lot of dialogue telling us about the Darkest Day, but Rose himself barely mentions it. This all seems to be coming out of nowhere. Rose is making such a big deal out of this and is honestly being completely irrational about it. It didn't make me feel that Rose was being drastic, it more felt like the whole thing is just badly written. Even with Leon being the sane one out of the two, Rose has such little build-up for believing this that it comes off as unsatisfying, especially since he just sends everything into disarray by bringing back the Darkest Day the next day just before the championship battle. Also, that's what happens next. In the finals, you fight and defeat Bede, who crashed the party, and a few of the previous gym leaders. Just before the fight with the champion, Rose interrupts the show and tells everyone that he's bringing back the Darkest Day right now to save Galar's future. He also says that he can't control the energy and that he's in a pickle, and then blames Leon for not listening to him. And then, literally, right after the announcement, Hop and the player character go to the forest from the beginning of the game because who knows why. Hop says that it might be a good idea for some reason, I forget. I guess he remembers what Sonia has said about the Darkest Day and thinks they might find the Sword and Shield Pokemon there, since they stopped the Darkest Day last time. They take the rested Sword and Shield from the forest and then immediately head for Rose. There isn't any tension in this part of the game when there's probably supposed to be. It's a real shame the way things turned out. I have a feeling that the post-game was actually supposed to be in this part of the game, but the team thought that they'd move it to after the game so they could have some post-game stuff. Or at least, that's what I think. You run into Alina and she asks you to save Rose. She says that her Pokemon have been Dynamaxed at the Hammerlock Stadium, and if any more Pokemon in their Dynamax, the stadium might collapse into the underground plant where Rose is. She says that if we don't do something now, that all the Pokemon in the region will Dynamax. She then mentions the name Eternatus, who is apparently very important to the plot of the game, even though it's the first time we hear about it. What is all of this? We have to help Lee. I mean, I agree. Rose at this point isn't important anymore. He's the one that set this all off, but battling him now would be worthless. Hop is sitting there in defeat from Rose like he can't do anything anymore. He needs to get the crap out of there and help Leon fight Eternatus. And with all the information the game is dumping on us all at once, it's honestly difficult to understand what's actually going on. Why is Rose bringing back the Darkest Day now going to solve the energy crisis in 1,000 years? I played the game twice and then re-watched all the cutscenes and I'm still having a hard time understanding his motives and his line of thinking. Rose says that the energy will cease to exist in 1,000 years, so they have to act as quickly as possible. But why is bringing back the Darkest Day a solution to that? I guess releasing Eternatus will just give the region all the energy it needs, if I'm understanding it correctly. If this is the case though, then we have learned nothing about this until this point. Eternatus was never mentioned in any of the cutscenes regarding the Darkest Day at all. How are we supposed to draw any sort of conclusion with the information we have? Even with Alina telling us that Eternatus gives off energy to Dynamax, it. It is one line. Unless you hit the audience with an explanation or demonstration that will stick out in their minds, it is so easy to forget. I eventually had to check Bulbapedia again to make sure I was getting everything right. And I swear their article about the Darkest Day has information that is nowhere to be found in the actual game. I couldn't find anything about its exact date or whether or not Eternatus was involved in it. There's barely a mention of Eternatus being the one that produced the Wishing Stars to begin with. Not only did I play the game twice and rewatch all the cutscenes, but I copied down every single line of dialogue from the scenes that talk about the Darkest Day. I swear, this information isn't in the game. I guess the game just wanted us to make the connection ourselves? I suppose we'll just have to go with what Bulbapedia says. Eternatus' very existence was never mentioned before this point in the story. All we were told about the Darkest Day is that a black storm covered the sky, Dynamax Pokemon almost destroying the region, and the legendary hero with a sword and shield who stopped it. I am not kidding. I mean, obviously the Darkest Day had something to do with energy, since Dynamaxing is mentioned almost every time it's brought up, but the very first time Eternatus is mentioned in any way, shape, or form, including by name or not, is Olina, just before you go down and fight Rose. It is not hinted towards at all. And why are we fighting Rose to begin with? The music makes it seem like this is the battle that will decide everything, but everything has already been decided. Rose woke up Eternatus and now has the energy he needs to save Galar's future energy crisis. He even says so right before you fight him. There is nothing to stop now. He has woken up Eternatus. In order to stop Dynamax Pokemon from rampaging all throughout Galar, we need to stop Eternatus right now. Rose is just sitting around, not doing anything. He's unimportant. Stopping Eternatus now will potentially save hundreds of lives. I think that's a better trade-off than Rose potentially getting away. Was his purpose to slow us down getting to Eternatus? Even if it is, Rose says right after the fight that it doesn't even matter because Leon has probably already caught Eternatus by now. So not only do we not have a motive to fight Rose, but now he doesn't have a reason to fight us either if he actually believes this. He woke up Eternatus but couldn't control it, and so Leon comes in to fight Eternatus himself, which Rose is apparently okay with basing off what he says right after you fight him. He even says that Leon came in for Rose to save him like a princess from a dragon by fighting Eternatus. What? Why are we here? Why are we challenging him to a fight? Why is he challenging us to a fight if Leon is supposedly already fixing the problem? Rose apparently tells Leon to help control Eternatus by catching it, but when we come along, suddenly we can't get in his way to stop his plans, even though Leon already is by Rose's request. I just don't understand Rose's logic and his line of thinking. This part of the game is so terribly written that it's hard to keep up with everything that's going on. Okay, so after you fight Rose, you immediately go up to Leon and see that he's struggling with Eternatus, and its reveal is so disappointing that it's hard to even fathom. Eternatus is way too cool looking for this reveal to be so underwhelming. I mean, granted, because it didn't have any build up to begin with, it wasn't going to leave that much of an impact anyway, but like, Leon and Eternatus are just standing there looking at each other. You see this massive cool looking Pokemon and there's no dramatic build up or intense music or anything. It's just like, here he is. Yep, the cutscene where Leon throws a Pokeball then plays, and then the dramatic music kicks in. The scene should have just started right here and then included some dialogue before Leon threw his Pokeball. The actual fight with Eternatus doesn't really amount to much. It looks pretty cool for sure, but things kind of just happen. Hop thinks that holding up the Sword and Shield will work somehow, and then it does when the dog Pokemon show up. It's then just one big raid battle with Hop and the dogs. So you catch Eternatus, the dogs howl and jump into the sky, and 3 days later? We just did some huge accomplishment. Why is it suddenly at 3 days later? Yeah, so as it turns out, immediately after the Eternatus fight, the very next scene jumps forward a few days. There is no fanfare at all for beating Eternatus. No one says how amazing the player is, no one thanks them, nothing. The next scene plays, you learn that Rose turned himself in, Hop tells us exactly what happened literally right after we just accomplished it, and then you're off to fight Leon in the final battle. Holy crap, dude. Give the player some kind of reward for doing this. In the span of 35 minutes, from the time Rose interrupts your fight to catching Eternatus, you fight what seems to be two of the most important battles in the game back to back with no fanfare at all. And now the game is telling us it's time to fight Leon, literally, actually, immediately after all of this is happening. There's such little payoff for anything you just did that it ultimately feels like you wasted your time. We're playing a video game. Let us feel some sense of accomplishment for what we did. And to top it all off, Leon says, "They know you're the one that caught Eternatus and saved the future of the Galar region." Wait, so catching Eternatus does save the future of Galar? As in 1,000 years from now? So like, Rose gets no credit for this. The player wouldn't have saved the future of Galar if Rose didn't summon Eternatus. Unless they're not talking about 1,000 years in the future and just talking about saving everyone's lives. I don't know, man. Rose seems like he accomplished what he set out to do. Turning himself in just makes it seem like he regretted what he did. It would probably be better if he was on the run or something. There's also a post-game, but it's just some stupid BS happening with some weird dudes with annoying hair, and I kind of just want to forget about them. They make Pokemon Dynamax and you go and stop them, and that's pretty much it. 90% of the game's story is crammed into the last hour, and it's a mess. It's confusing trying to follow along with it coherently. Not a lot of things are explained well, and reasons and motivations for some of the characters' actions later on are really bizarre. Not a lot of things add up, and it's hard to connect one thing with another. Nothing that happens in the narrative has any lasting impact, and because everything is shoved into the ending, the plot points and concepts did not have proper build-up. The pacing of the game is all over the place, with characters constantly stopping you, repeating information you already know, and having very little progression or new information about the story at all from the 3rd gym onward. We did pick up on a few highlights in the strengths of the game's narrative though. The gym challenge storyline, even with how simple it is effective for a video game, which is why Game Freak has never changed it at all, except for Sun and Moon. The cast of characters have a lot of potential, and there are some that are actually great. Hop, even with how annoying he can be, has depth to uncover and actually goes through growth throughout the story. Marnie, despite not having much depth, is a fun and lovable character with an endearing personality. Beat is the best rival character Pokemon has had in a long time. Period. We didn't mention the gym leaders, but they're memorable and pretty likable, even with them only having 1 or 2 overblown character traits. We need to keep these things in mind as we go on to the next section of the video. There is a lot that needs to be done when it comes to the story, but there's also a lot that the game gives us to work with. Some ideas could be seen as silly or bad, like Rose's motivations and plans to save the future in 1,000 years, but these are ideas we can work with. So, with the summary and critique of the story out of the way, let's talk about what the game could have done differently and what changes to the story we can make to have it truly shine without changing any of its core concepts. If there's one thing that needs improving in Pokémon Sword and Shield's story, it's build-up. A lot of these scenes at the end of the game could actually be impactful if we hint towards them throughout. Doing a lot of small changes over the course of the game can make a big difference, as we can spread out the ideas crammed into the ending of the game throughout its entirety. As we do that, we can also change and emphasize certain characters so that they're more important and revolve around the story, as well as making the characters who are already important to the story have more significance. We're doing all of this so these ideas and concepts can have the lasting impact they deserve. The basic narrative for the Gym Challenger storyline is fine. The only way I can think to improve it is to talk about the characters, so let's start there. We don't really need to go over the player character. Pokemon has always left the protagonist a blank slate so that we can insert ourselves into the game. Perhaps we could do a few things to them, but it wouldn't have that much of an impact on the story, so let's just keep them as they are. With that out of the way, let's go over the other characters, Marnie, Bede, and Hop. And by that, I mean mainly Hop. So, what do we know about Hop? Right off the bat, we know that he's a good friend that has a positive attitude. He looks up to his older brother a lot and wants to become champion just like him. He's a hard worker, as we can see him throughout the game switching up his Pokemon to try different things out. He stays this way throughout the game, only going through a few things that could be considered development. The two main examples being the following. Number 1. After he's beaten by Bede, he goes through a rough patch and beats himself up for not being good enough and not wanting to disgrace his brother's reputation. Number 2. In the postgame, he says he realizes that he wants to help Pokemon rather than battle with them. Let's keep these core concepts and build upon them. Leon, when you first meet him, mentions that Hop is his #1 fan. Let's take this and make it more apparent that Hop really looks up to his brother and wants to follow in his footsteps, but slowly realizes through his journey that even though he looks up to his brother, being the champion isn't necessarily what he wants. There are a few moments in the game that we can use to hint more towards this. There's a part in the game where Team Yell won't let the gym challengers through because there's a snake Pokemon trying to sleep or something. We can use this scene to our advantage. After the Team Yell battle, Hop laments from Bede's comment that he's dragging Leon's good name down. We can make it so that after this scene, Hop checks to see if the snake Pokemon is doing okay and asks it if it needs any help or a possible trip to the Pokemon Center. We would need scenes like this spread out sporadically throughout the game to have the audience get the impression that Hop is really fond of Pokemon and is more concerned about helping them rather than battling with them. We also need to hint that Hop is only following in Leon's footsteps because he looks up to him rather than actually wanting to become the champion. This is a better outcome than what we get in the post-game, where Hop wanting to help Pokemon comes too quickly with very little build-up. We'll make Hop's journey a soul-searching one where his real purpose, unbeknownst to him, is finding out what he truly loves to do. Then during the semifinals when you defeat him, it hits him that this isn't his true passion. He can still be crushed upon defeat because of how hard he worked to get there, also because this animation of Hop being defeated is great. So when the final scene with Hop happens in the post-game, you don't really need to change much since the build-up was enough for the scene to have an impact. Okay, next up. Marnie, as fine as she is by herself already, could benefit from having more scenes where we get to know her better. Her lead card details some things about her life that make her more endearing. How about, instead of learning these things about her in this roundabout way that some players might not even read, we learn these things about her during the actual game. Her card implies that she was a bit antisocial and didn't really have a positive attitude, but becomes more cheerful as she played with the Pokemon she received from her brother. Her relationships with her brother and Morpeko can add more to her character, and we get to learn more about her in the process. Plus, hinting towards a character before they're actually shown is always a good thing. The last thing I'd change is to have her actually visibly upset when you defeat her at the Champion Cup. Give her a unique animation like they did with Hop. Have her actually show some emotion since we don't really see any from her in the game, and suddenly you have a very impactful moment. Give us more of a reason to love her. As for Bede, he's almost perfect. We're going to have Bede appear more often by moving the scenes where he's disqualified from the gym challenge and his scene with Opal to later in the game. We battle Bede more often, he stays a jerk for longer, and instead of him disappearing from the 5th gym onward, we'll have the Opal scene after you fight Raihan. Besides that, nothing else really needs to be changed. He fulfills his role wonderfully. He's the jerk character I've wanted in Pokemon since 1st gen. He grows as a character, has great scenes, and honestly he's the best character in the game. There are more characters to discuss, but the ones that are left have a direct impact on the plot of the game. So for now, let's talk about that plot. Specifically, the Darkest Day. We're going to keep it so that no one really knows the history of the Darkest Day besides the very basic stuff. A black storm covering the sky, gigantic Pokemon rampaging throughout Galar, and the hero who saved the day. But we are going to expand upon this lore a little. We'll include more of a story this time around as the characters discover more about it instead of just the facts of what happened. We're going to mention Eternatus and his relevance for the Darkest Day early on instead of right at the very end of the game. Eternatus looks way too cool for him to have no build up at all and then suddenly be a big threat. It also needs to be mentioned consistently throughout the game, probably alongside the legendary hero. We also need to have Wishing Stars mentioned in the story of the Darkest Day, as Eternatus is the one that made the Wishing Stars to begin with and would be a good way to help the player understand the plot better as we get to the end of the game. We can also have a few things about the story be ambiguous so more can be revealed about it. Because it's a Pokemon game, the story of the Darkest Day doesn't need to be super complex or deep. Just a simple story telling the events is fine. In this new version, at the beginning of the game, people know about how a black storm covered the sky, that Galar was almost destroyed, and that a legendary hero saved the day. But that's it. We don't know that Galar was almost destroyed by gigantic Pokemon specifically. Because of this, even though it is part of Galar's history, people don't pay much attention to it because no one really knows a whole lot about it. Professor Magnolia, at the start of the game, says that she's been researching about the Darkest Day and has found out something about it. She says that apparently the hero used Wishing Stars in order to save the day. Now, we know that this isn't true in the actual story in hindsight, but it's enough to raise a lot of questions about the Darkest Day. In our version, the story does not mention Pokemon at all, yet Wishing Stars, which gives Pokemon the ability to Dynamax, were in the hero's possession. Does that mean the hero used Pokemon to stop the Darkest Day instead of a Sword and Shield? This is enough for Magnolia to send Sonia off to do more research, since Magnolia is too old to do that or something. Then over the course of the game, the player character, Hop, and Sonia discover that Pokemon were involved in the Darkest Day, and that those Pokemon Dynamaxing is what almost caused the destruction of Galar. They also learn about a legendary dragon Pokemon that emits a massive amount of energy, and that this Pokemon is what produced the Wishing Stars to begin with. The hero, who they come to find out is actually two legendary Pokemon, engage in a battle with the mysterious dragon Pokemon and defeat it, causing its massive energy to finally disappear and return the Dynamax Pokemon back to normal. The legendary dogs are declared heroes, but are never seen again. The defeated dragon Pokemon left a ton of Wishing Stars behind, which are used in the present day for Galar's energy supply as well as Dynamaxing Pokemon in battle. There, we didn't change the story that much, and we are giving it a lot more clarity than it's presented in the actual game. We need Eternatus, the mysterious dragon Pokemon, to be revealed early on so that it can have the proper build-up it needs to have an impact for when you actually face off against it at the end of the game. game. The question then comes with how they learn about these things in the first place. In the actual game, Sonia just kind of theorizes things and everyone assumes she's right. We can still work with this with scenes like Bede breaking down the wall in Stownside and Sonia looking at the images in Turffield. But we can add more information and tidbits in these scenes, as well as replace scenes that don't matter with the characters exploring unknown parts of Galar, or just Sonia doing it off screen and then calling you to those places. We could discover caves that have ancient drawings on them, that sort of thing. We can even use that specific example to tease how cool Eternatus is. Seeing an ancient drawing of something that looks like a dragon skeleton, or something that resembles Eternatus, just not as cool looking as the actual thing, but cool enough that it makes you curious. We'll also make it so that the legendary dogs have more relevance too. Perhaps they can be guiding the player and Sonia to these artifacts, which wouldn't be that out of place since we see one of them at the beginning of the game. We just need to add a few more scenes where things like this happen. They reside at the Slumbering Weald, but since it's Pokemon and pretty much anything is possible, we can make it so that the dogs can project images of themselves in front of the player and lead them to more of these locations that have to do with Galar's history. This also makes the reveal that they were the legendary hero all along more impactful. But that's really it when it comes to the changes to the Darkest Day specifically. Like I said, I don't want to change the core concepts of the ideas they have. So all we have to do with the Darkest Day is add Eternatus and add a little story to it rather than just the facts or events. We've changed a little bit about how the cast learns about it, and that's a small change but a needed one. We need small changes like this in order for the ending of the game to actually work and not be such a mess. We also want to avoid repeating information like in the original game. So we're going to add scenarios that build upon the information we already know, as well as add depth to the characters and have build up for important moments down the line. And if there's one part of the game that needs proper build up, it's the end of the game. And in order to talk about that, we need to talk about Rose. Rose is pivotal to the story of Pokémon Sword and Shield. One of the reasons why the story fails, at least in my eyes, is because the game made a pivotal character not important at all. Not until the last hour of the game, that is. So we're going to make heavy changes to Rose. Not necessarily to his character or personality, but his role in the story. We are going to make Rose much more relevant and show up far more often than he does in the actual game. Rose's concerns about Galar's future in 1,000 years, his plans to wake up Eternatus, and his motivations come out of nowhere near the end of the game. But with the changes we're going to make, instead of it coming out of nowhere, we'll see the gradual change in him as the story goes along. Rose is a genuinely friendly and loving guy, and shares his hopes for the future generation of Galar and the Pokemon that reside there. His dream is to make the world a better place for them, and he has a deep passion for this. Unlike in the actual game, Rose now knows just as much as everyone else does about the Darkest Day, and will follow the developments that are made by Sonia and the player character. As Sonia learns more about the Darkest Day, she theorizes that things are going to get messy for people far into the future. Eternatus produced a lot of wishing stars back then, but not an infinite amount, and they will eventually run out. When that happens, Galar will have no source of energy left. Since Rose is responsible for the energy of Galar, he shares his concerns over the matter, as he just assumed that wishing stars were naturally produced or something. But Sonia assures everyone that it's so far into the future that they shouldn't have to worry about it. The player and Hop agree and continue with the gym challenge. Rose, on the other hand, has a different reaction from everyone and is still bothered by it. And this doesn't need to be much either. Showing small signs of concern can go a long way. Something like the scene ending with the cast walking off screen, leaving Rose behind, only to show his head slightly lowered in a dialogue box showing an ellipsis. This small thing shows the audience that Sonia's answer didn't satisfy him. Also, yeah, the hypothetical situations that are coming up are going to be like this. I wish I was good enough at art or had a more appealing way of doing this, but this is the best I could come up with. A little later in the game, around the time you get the 4th or 5th gym badge, Sonia calls you and says she's found strange drawings in a cave around Turffield. Sure, why not? She tells us to come, but also says that the chairman is coming and that he had contacted her and wants to be more involved about finding out about the Darkest Day. You explore the cave Pokemon style and reach where Sonia is at. You briefly discuss the drawings on the wall and what it means to the plot before Rose shows up as well. Before you can discuss Sonia's findings with him, he brings up that he's looked into how much energy Galar uses and how many wishing stars it consumes. He says that based on the energy consumption, alongside with how many wishing stars are assumed to be left, based on science or something, I don't know, that Galar's energy will run out in 1,000 years. Sonia and Hop express that that's great news and that it won't run out until long after they're gone. Rose stands in silence at their reaction before saying something like, "I do find it concerning though, though. This is Galar's future we're talking about. Sonia says that that's true, but they have 1,000 years to figure out how to solve it, so they're in no rush. Rose hesitantly agrees, but we can tell that it still bothers him. Throughout the game, Rose will continue to voice his concerns about the future of Galar, but is always brushed off by the other characters. It's in 1,000 years, bro. We just want to catch Pokemon. Remember, in our version, Rose is very passionate about the future generation that comes after him, and him being constantly brushed off and not being taken seriously by the characters even after voicing it multiple times will slowly get to him. His demeanor slowly goes from the typical friendly Rose to someone more stern, as he continues to say that they need to act as fast as possible in order to save the future generation. Leon in one of these scenes later on could finally snap at him and say that they just want to focus on the gym challenge for now, and they can wait until the end of it to worry about the silly energy crisis. Rose, little by little, starts to go crazy. People are inconsiderate of his concerns and feelings, and his constant worrying about the future makes him start to think that everyone else is the villain, that they are unreliable, and that he's the only one that can do anything about this. He sees them as the people who will be responsible for the failing of the future generation. Leon starts to notice Rose's shift in character and confronts him about it, which the player runs into the middle of as they enter into the next town. It's a heated argument, with Rose saying that they don't care about Galar's future, and Leon being reasonable and saying that it's so far off into the future that they don't need to worry about it. The player interrupts the argument and they both regain their composure. Neither of them apologize to each other, and Rose quietly walks off with Alina. Eventually, Sonia discovers Eternatus' fossil, which wows and amazes everyone. Even though Sonia wants to send it to her grandma for research, Rose insists that it be taken to his company so they can study it and perhaps find a solution to the energy problem, since Eternatus is the one that produced the wishing stars to begin with. Sonia doesn't like the idea, but says they can discuss it with Professor Magnolia. The game continues, and sometime later, Sonia calls you and says that the fossil is missing and that someone had to have stolen it. Rose claims that he knows nothing about this, but of course, as the audience, we have a strong suspicion that Rose did actually take it. This leads us to the scene in the game where you hear a large explosion and see a huge red surge of light after you fight Piers and get the Dark type badge. But instead of Leon showing up and saying that he'll handle it, he doesn't show up at all, and you and Hop go investigate it yourselves. You guys see a few Dynamax Pokemon in front of Hammerlock Stadium and take care of them. This scene is supposed to hint that Rose is up to no good and is also starting to feed wishing stars to Eternatus, so we have to have Rose show up. As the player and Hop are at Hammerlock Stadium finishing up calming down the Pokemon, Rose shows up from out of the elevator and tells everyone that one of the machines he owns that handles wishing stars malfunctions, and he apologizes. Then finally we get to before the finals, where Leon invites you and Hop to dinner. Right after the invitation, Rose calls Leon and says to come to Rose Tower. Leon says that he'll be quick about it because Rose says something like, "I want to briefly apologize for my behavior back in whatever town. Come to Rose Tower so I can apologize in person," and says he won't be late for dinner. However, after several hours, they start to assume the worst, especially since Rose has been acting crazy lately, and they go to Rose Tower to get Leon. On their way to Rose Tower, they run into Marnie and Piers. Olina stops them and says not to disturb Rose before walking off, and the cast ignores this and goes to Rose Tower anyway. The game will have Rose Tower more like a building now that the player has to explore and find their way to the top instead of just a huge elevator. And just before we get to Rose, Olina stops us and we fight her. And this is a good place to talk about Olina and her role in the story. In the actual game, she barely has one. You could quite literally remove her from the game and nothing would be different. The one thing we have to work with when it comes to her is just before her fight when she goes insane, and that's it. We don't learn anything about her. She doesn't even have her own league card. This is why I've barely mentioned her until now. There was nothing to talk about. Let's use this to our advantage and make Olina a good side character that not only we have at least some attachment to, but someone who can build Rose up. With her fight in the game being the only thing we have to work with, we'll need to find some inspiration to help us with her character and her backstory. That'll work. As we have spoken about before, Rose is a great and caring guy at the beginning of the game. We'll create a scenario for Olina that involves Rose saving her life in a figurative way. Rose helped her out in some way to the point where she appreciates Rose and really looks up to him. We don't need to know all the details of someone's backstory, especially a side character, but having a vague but meaningful background to her character could go a long way. Olina was in a bad place in her life, didn't know what to do or where to go, and that's when Rose came in and saved her from her troubled life. If we wanted to be specific, we could say that she was homeless or something, Rose felt bad for her and took her in, and she eventually became his secretary. The first time we really get a chance to talk with her is in Hulberry, where we see her and Rose talking with Bede. She doesn't do anything in this scene though, besides telling the chairman to hurry and telling the player to meet with Rose at the restaurant after they get the water badge. She doesn't do anything of significance in the scene at the restaurant either. Or like, ever. So instead, when you first meet her with the chairman, he introduces her as a great assistant and that we shouldn't be intimidated by her despite the stern look on her face. We'll work with what little we have for her and keep her mannerisms stoic and blunt. At first, she just seems like she's doing her job, but you eventually come to find that she actually really cares for the chairman and wants to do everything she can to show him that she's grateful for him. At that part of the game, we wouldn't know why yet, but as we continue to see both her and Rose, we can learn a little about her at a time since these scenes are mostly centered around Rose and the Darkest Day, and we don't want to detract from them too much. Just a little something here and there is fine for a side character while still being enough for us to care. We could even see her away from the chairman doing an errand for him as we're exploring a cave or a route. A small dialogue exchange is fine, and during these exchanges she could talk about how much she admires Rose and that he's done a lot for her, etc. As Rose gets crazier as the story progresses and the other characters start to worry about him, Olina takes us aside and tells us not to worry and that the chairman is just passionate about the future generation. Down the line, she can mention that he saved her life without going into much detail about it and say that he would never do anything bad. When we can see that he's actually insane, you can see her gradually starting to support Rose in his views and how she owes everything to him, so it's the least I can do. But also tells us not to worry. He wants to change the world for the future generation, but he's not going to do anything drastic. So when it's apparent that he's going to do something drastic and the cast storms Rose Tower to confront him, Olina stands in your way, and you see that she not only admires Rose, but is actually kind of obsessive of him for saving her life, so she will do anything for him. Rose is pretty much the only thing that matters to Olina. Chairman Rose deserves for his dream to become reality. He's put so much hard work into this. I won't allow you to thwart his efforts to build a better future. It's all about Rose rather than his plan, because Olina is obsessed with him. After the battle, she finally reveals what Rose did for her when she was going through so much hardship in her life, giving the cast sympathy for Rose before confronting him. Perhaps people can point out that changing her character like this would ruin the cool little Easter egg when you fight Olina, how all of her Pokemon are graceful, beautiful, and feminine, but then her last Pokemon is literal garbage, reflecting her character. Okay, let me ask you something. Is Olina actually like this? Sure, in the battle itself, and like 10 seconds before the battle begins, we see Olina go insane and now has a scary facial expression, but do we actually know anything about her? Like, I'm honestly asking here, because I can't think of anything. After defeating Olina, we see Rose and Leon arguing again, but Leon seems to be more reasonable and tells him that after the gym challenge, which should end tomorrow, he will dedicate all of his time to helping Rose. Leon is the straight man in this scene when it comes to Rose. He's saying what we are thinking, but in our version, we at least know what Rose has been going through and that he's kind of insane and can't be reasoned with. We can sympathize with Rose at least a little bit since we know that he can be a great guy with what he's done for both Bede and Olina. Plus, we've seen him be blown off by everyone throughout the game. The scene can play largely the same as it did in the original, with a few more lines added in, with Leon leaving and saying that he'll help after the Champion Cup. This leaves Rose unsatisfied. He doesn't respond before Leon walks away with the player and Hop. And then, just before the champion battle, you can see that the chairman has snapped, and the scene plays exactly as it does in the actual game, announcing that he has brought back the Darkest Day in order to save the future of Galar. With the changes we've made to Rose's role in the story and the build-up he now has, the scene no longer feels like it comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't feel out of place. After the announcement, instead of immediately going to Slumbering Weald and then right to the Rose fight, we're going to take the post-game content and put it right here at the end of Rose's announcement. The Darkest Day needs to seem like a big deal and really threatening. And the post-game, with Dynamax Pokemon running rampant and the player and Hop desperately trying to stop it, is a perfect fit for this situation. But we'll need to make some modifications. For starters, Sword and Shield Guy don't exist anymore. Period. They were either never born or were murdered before the game started. We never hear anything about them, ever. The overall tone in this part of the game will be different from what it is in the actual game, which means a serious tone since everything is going to crap. Leon and others, like Sonia, are trying to locate Rose and Olina, while the player, Hop, Marnie, Bede, and the gym leaders are trying to stop the Pokemon that have Dynamaxed and are trying to lead people to safety. The player and Hop return to their hometown to stop the Dynamax Pokemon that are there to save their families. And in the middle of that, instead of Hop just suggesting to go to the Slumbering Weald out of nowhere, especially since it doesn't fit the situation they're now in, Dog Pokemon projects himself in front of them again, and gestures them to follow him into Slumbering Weald, where they find the rusted Sword and Shield. Eventually you find out where Rose is and head to Hammerlock Stadium. Hop calls Leon and tells him to come to the stadium, but since Hop and the player are already there and can't afford to wait for help, they'll have to deal with Rose as Leon is on his way. Rose is in the same room as he is in the actual game, but we see the fossil of Eternatus behind him. Turns out he actually did steal it. Rose explains that Eternatus has been reacting to and absorbing wishing stars that he feeds needs it, to the point where Eternatus is now on the verge of reviving. Rose continually feeding it wishing stars is also what caused the explosion and surge of red light from earlier. Eternatus is already producing enough energy for the darkest day to be happening and for Pokemon to be Dynamaxing. You can still stop it in time if you act now, but Rose is in your way of doing so. The battle between the player and Rose then commences, and with everything we've talked about so far, changing parts of the narrative and especially Rose's role in the story, we now have all the build-up necessary to have this battle be awesome. The tension in this battle can be felt as you can really see Rose in his determination to fix the future. Throughout your journey, you've seen Rose struggle with his ideals and be brushed aside by the other characters. So now, not only do we realize the gravity of the situation, but you actually know where Rose is coming from with all this. The awesome one-winged dad bod theme plays, and the player feels the impact and the weight of this battle. Oh man, this is serious. I need to save the world from this maniac. You end up beating Rose, but the fight is long enough to delay the player, and Eternatus finally awakens. A cool cutscene plays with cool dramatic music, and a red light envelops Eternatus' fossil before it emerges from the light and shows itself to the player. By the way, Eternatus is supposedly 65 feet long, which is bigger than Wailord, so we can make this guy freaking huge and terrifying. He breaks out of the room just as Leon shows up, and the cast follows it to the top floor of Hammerlock Stadium to battle it. Since Eternatus is so big, we can make the fight begin as a raid battle with the player, Hop, and Leon. They defeat Eternatus, but then it absorbs all the energy in the Galar region, like in the original game, but now its Eternamax form is way bigger, much too big of a threat to deal with, even with the three of them. Leon tells the player and Hop to run away and that he'll try and handle it himself. Before they can get away though, Eternatus makes quick work of Leon's Charizard, leaving just the player and Hop. Desperate and out of options, Hop remembers the Sword and Shield that they were guided to by the dog Pokemon and suggests that perhaps they can summon them somehow. The rest of the battle plays out as it does in the original, with the dog Pokemon helping Hop and the player defeat Eternatus and the player catching it in the end, saving the day. It cuts to the next day with the player waking up at their house, where their mom congratulates them for saving Galar and tells them that she's very proud. You walk out of the house to see Hop there, where he tells us that everyone is talking about them and the people they met on their journey would love to speak with them. The player now has the option to go to any or every town they've been to and talk with whoever they want. Marnie, Bee, the gym leaders, random NPCs, they'll each have something to say to you and tell you how amazing you are for what you did. The player sets the pace here as they can go to Winden at any time to fight Leon in the finals to the Champion Cup. We'll put a little bit of moral ambiguity in here too, where it's implied that the future of Galar is saved because they have Eternatus in their possession, which will allow them to produce energy for Galar indefinitely, which wouldn't have happened without Rose's actions. Rose and Alina end up getting away in the confusion surrounding Eternatus and are on the run somewhere. Rose, even though he put everyone's lives in danger, accomplished what he wanted to do, and if we have him turn himself in, it shows that he regrets his decision. Leon, as he mentions how everyone knows how the player saved Galar from destruction, also says something like, "I suppose we don't have to worry about the energy crisis anymore either." And with that, the championship battle commences, and the player finally beats the game. Pokémon Sword and Shield had a lot of potential when it came to the narrative. It could have been the first Pokémon game in a while to have an impactful, grand, well-told story, but ultimately it became one of the most poorly written in the series. The suggestions I've listed are what I would have liked to see in the game and are things that I know I would have personally enjoyed. I'm sure you can find problems with what I've laid out, maybe even find some holes in it, but it's at least more interesting and engaging now than it was in the actual game. What kind of changes would you make to the story? I mean, maybe you wouldn't make any changes and genuinely like the story. I don't know. More power to you if that's the case. Perhaps this is an odd way to end the video, but I'd like to end on at least a somewhat positive note. Pokémon Sword is the most fun I've had with Pokémon in a long time. The series had become stale for me with each new game release, and while the typical formula the games are known for, and the lack of innovation when it came to the gameplay did contribute to that, I just became tired of the new designs of the Pokémon themselves. From Generation 4 onward, the designs became less appealing to me, but Generation 8 surprised me with its new Pokémon, as it holds some of my favorites now. Hatterene, Alcremie, Eldegoss, Sirfetch'd, Galarian, Corsola, I think these Pokemon are great. There's certainly a lot to hate about these games, but for me, it was the first time since Ruby and Sapphire that I felt like a kid again, excited to explore new routes and see what kind of new Pokemon there were. And with Sword and Shield, I was rarely disappointed in that aspect. It was definitely more difficult to play a second time for this video, because I can only get that sense of wonder from discovering new Pokemon the first time around. It made the flaws of the game a lot more apparent, especially with the story, since that's what I was paying extra close attention to. Even with all the problems it has, I find it hard to hate this game.